everyone, welcome to today's Insight Hour. Just going to give it a minute to let people trickle in. Welcome to the session today. Please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat bar. I'm going to start at 1 minute past. Okay, hello, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining today's Insight Hour. I am Aisha Fordham, the Head of Membership and Engagement at IDA, the Employers Initiative on Domestic Abuse. We are a network of now over 2,000 employer members. So we're very excited to say we have reached the 2,000 mark, and really great to have you on the call here today. So our mission is to support employers to put in an effective response around domestic abuse to support their employees. Work could be somebody's only safe space. So really it's about creating that place of physical and psychological safety where somebody can get support if they are going through domestic abuse. Today, we're going to be looking at how employers can support male victim survivors, which is a really important part of the response to ensure that the support is available to all employees. Just a few housekeeping points before we start. Please put any questions in the Q&A box, and we will have 10 minutes at the end for questions. Please write any comments, anything you want to put in the chat bar, introduce yourselves, but any questions should go in the Q&A box or we may miss them. Carry on introducing yourselves, chatting in the chat bar. If you can, we encourage you to post on LinkedIn and to follow us and to tag IDA if you can do. And just be mindful of anything that you do post in the chat bar, because people have, everybody can see it in there. So just be mindful of the language you choose to use. We are recording the session today, which will help us prepare a summary. So we will be sharing the recording and the written summary in a few weeks' time in our Tuesday trio. Any questions we don't get to at the end, we can go to the speakers and we can answer those as a follow-up and share those afterwards. We appreciate that domestic abuse is a challenging topic, so please do look after yourselves and step away from the webinar at any point if you need to. We have IDA Ambassador Gareth Jones on the call here today, and he's going to be sharing his own experiences, so please just be mindful and look after yourselves. We have a directory of support services on the IDA website, and it should be being posted in the chat bar now, so just have access to that if you need it, or if you'd like to signpost anybody to that for support. So we're going to be looking at the impact of domestic abuse on male victim survivors, barriers to seeking support, and then closing on real practical ways that employers can support male employees. We have got 5 fantastic speakers today, so I'm just going to turn to each of them to introduce themselves, and then we will kick off with the presentations. So if I could come to Liz first, please.
Hi, my name is Dr. Liz Bates. I'm an Associate Professor in Family Violence and Abuse at the University of Cumbria, and my research specialises in working with male victims of domestic violence and their children.
Amazing, thank you, Liz. Gareth?
Afternoon all, my name is Gareth. My main day job is working in healthcare. However, I do also act as an ambassador for IDA, and I'm a victim of and survivor of domestic abuse.
Brilliant, thank you, Gareth. Mark?
My name is Mark Brooks. I'm the chair of the Mankind Initiative charity, supporting male victims for nearly 25 years. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Sian?
Hello everybody, my name's Sian. I'm the Chief Exec at the Paul Lavelle Foundation, and we're a charity organisation. We're based in the Northwest and we support male victim survivors of domestic abuse.
You and Chris.
Hi, I'm Chris. A background of working in primary and secondary care mental health for many years. Semi-retired now and absolutely loving the work that I do for the Paul Lavelle Foundation.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Thank you all for being here. Without further ado, I'm going to start the first presentation. So I'm going to hand over to Liz. If you can kick us off. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this webinar today. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I'm delighted to be able to talk, hopefully briefly, I'm not very good at that, but hopefully briefly, about the research that we have around domestic violence and abuse. Next slide, please. So I wanted to start with some prevalence statistics from the latest figures from the ONS. It is estimated that 1.4 million women and 751,000 men since the age of 16 and over have experienced, no, sorry, I've said that wrong, age 16 and over have experienced domestic abuse in the last year. What this means is for men, in terms of the presentation today, is that 1 in 5 to 6 men have been a victim of partner abuse in their lifetime. And that equates to around 4.3 million men. They consist of 40% of all victims. 1 in 20 men said they were a victim of partner or ex-partner abuse in 23/4, which equates to 1.1 million men, and they constitute 39% of all victims. So I think that I wanted to start with some really important prevalence statistics, because of, despite the fact that I think we talk about male victims more than we ever have done before, some people are really still surprised by these prevalence statistics and expect that it is a much smaller proportion of victims than it is. Aisha's already said about the content of, obviously, of a webinar with a title like this, but I've included some direct quotes from my data, and some of the content on the slides is quite difficult to read and look at, so I just wanted to kind of warn you of that. Next slide, please. So I wanted to start just with a little bit of context about some of the types of abuse that men experience. So across the wider literature, we've got evidence now of the different types of abuse that men experience. And where we have the prevalence statistics that I've just pointed to before, the types of abuse and how we've sort of understood this type of abuse has come from other types of research. So the prevalence statistics come from quite quantitative based work, where it helps us obviously understand the prevalence and the numbers. But some of the critics of some of those numbers have sort of implied that actually we're not always capturing the context and the impact of domestic violence on men and women. So looking towards the qualitative data, so basically when we interview or we ask men and women, any victim survivor about their experiences, and we get them to kind of explain and talk through what has happened, what the impact of that was, etc., then we see that there is a real range of types of abuse that men experience, as well as women. And I think that it's kind of important to say at this point that the similarities in experience with men and women is greater than the differences. There are some differences, and I'm not going to draw on that today because there's not really enough time to talk through that, but there are more similarities than differences. So in the wider literature, what we've got is evidence, as I say, of this experience. What I tried to do in some of my own research was tap into the fact that we know men find it quite difficult to disclose their experiences. So I tried to utilise an approach with my research that was basically going to allow people to tell me anonymously about what had happened to them. So they could tell me, like, they've got it was basically using an anonymous online survey. They could tell me, I asked some questions about experience. They could type as much as they wanted to into that. But I had no idea, obviously, who was taking part. So of the 161 men that took part in my first survey, 25% of them had never told anybody else about that experience. So what I know from that is that I've captured quite a lot of experience that has not obviously been shared before. And it's important, as I say, to try and understand the wider context of how this is impacting all men. So I've included some quotes on the slide here that point to physical abuse, sexual abuse, and some non-physical forms as well. The physical abuse, as you can see, these are some examples, is serious and significant. It is definitely pointing to injuries and severe violence. There's also examples of sexual abuse, which again, I won't have enough time to kind of go into the sort of around the legislation and stuff related to that. But you can see that there were a number of men that were across the data that were forced to have sex when they didn't want to. And sort of non-physical is a really broad category which captures a range of different types of behaviour that includes sort of psychological and emotional abuse, as well as capturing things like coercive control, technological abuse, economic and financial abuse, and a range of sort of other things as well. Next slide, please. There's also something called identity abuse, which has sometimes been referred to as cultural abuse. And this is a type of physical and non-physical abuse, typically non-physical abuse, that is using personal characteristics of the victim survivor to demean, manipulate and control them. So where the abusive partner uses something that they know about the victim that is a really important personal identity specific characteristic and using that as a way to basically abuse them and coercively control them. And it's been talked about quite a lot within the LGBTQ plus community, where there have been sort of more specific explorations of this across the wider sort of domestic abuse sort of research. And what we see is that gender and sexual minority individuals have often experienced as quite specific types of coercive control that are in addition to the behaviours that we would see in the wider sort of, you know, in any other relationship. So, for example, outing is a common form of abuse in same-sex relationships where the perpetrator threatens to out their partner when they're not out to their friends and family or their workplace. We also know that, for example, and I won't kind of go through them, but just listed on the bottom there are different other ways in which people in this community can be manipulated, such as things like misgendering when somebody is trans or using the wrong pronouns, or discarding tools that allow people to communicate their gender identity, so things like makeup and chest binders, for example. Next slide, please. There are other ways that we've seen this as well across the wider literature. It hasn't been explored sort of specifically with men yet, although that is something that is ongoing. But we see, for example, the ways this is used. So, for example, within the women's literature, we see that there are threats to contact authorities to interfere with things like ongoing immigration processes, threats of deportation. And then some of my own research, we see examples of this type of abuse across people being manipulated or denigrated for their disabilities. The older men example is from a study using the data within the wider sample that were men that were over 60. And in that example, she had tried to convince him that he had Alzheimer's to sign over power of attorney. And then leading on to obviously the specifics around today, work has also been one, and I think that that's an interesting one because what I saw when looking for quotes to support this particular presentation was that this was actually an important aspect around that idea of identity abuse, where their work identity was important to who they were. That again was something that was used to demean and denigrate and to coercively control them. Next slide, please. So again, I'm sorry, there's lots of text on this. I was really struggling to choose the quotes that I wanted to include here. But what I've got here is some examples of the ways in which men were coercively controlled, abused or manipulated around employment and work. And you can see across these examples, that there are different ways that men have experienced this. And it can include things like being harassed at work. So, for example, calling work like a number of times and like not just a couple of times, like 40, 50 times, as some of the examples show, in a short period of time. It includes things like getting in contact with work colleagues, starting rumours. It could also be things around, for example, using or manipulating the ways in which they can get to work or to do their work. So, for example, it might be that they hide laptops. It could be that they hide mobile phones. It could be that, for example, in the third one down, that she was using the car. She objected to him using the car. So he would basically be struggling then to try and get to work. If they were out at work on a social occasion, for example, she would be harassing, continually calling or messaging, again, as you can see here. And the two bottom examples I've used as well is because I think there is still a misperception about who is impacted by domestic abuse. And it can literally be anybody across any job role, any sort of level in terms of a business or an organisation across a range of different sectors. And as you can see from this example here of a pilot as well as a GP, and that was what the job role was, sorry, it was a GP. As well as that, what you can see is that people are being, and men here are being manipulated regardless of the type of job that they're doing. So these are some examples of actually how this was going to really then significantly impact on the work that they were doing or trying to do, and this had ramifications for them. Next slide, please. There was also what we would see is that when the relationship had ended, we would see the ways in which the abuse would continue or change, and this again impacted around work and employment. So, for example, here, the first example here is he was trying not to be in contact with her, but she was then using his child's phone and coming to work and sort of harassing him in that way. as well as making allegations that directly impacted his work. And again, you can see from the rest of the quotes there that there were different ways in which she, and I should probably have said earlier on, apologies, that my work is working with female perpetrated violence towards men, which is why I keep using those pronouns. But what she was doing in these circumstances then was making allegations to disrupt his workplace, getting in touch, as I say, with his work colleagues, and ringing the workplace to make those allegations and really sort of seriously disrupt it. And across sort of all of the data that I've got, really, I can think of really specific examples of where men have been suspended from work and men have lost their jobs. Like, the impact of this is massive in terms of what can happen when an abuser gets hold of these sort of contact details and can kind of get in touch with the workplace like this. Next slide, please. And the impact of this, I think one of the other things that I wanted to add for anybody who is thinking about men that they may work with, obviously, and how this can impact, is that men are often not just being impacted through the workplace. So for men that are fathers, they may often be sort of battling with the loss of their children as well. This, I know from the work that I've done, where children are impacted, it is the most significant part of their experience. And so you may be working with men who are going through this, who are then also having lost their children, lost contact with their children, not being allowed to see them, for example. And these are a couple of quotes that were from a study I did with a colleague. And we basically, we asked men to bring photos to an interview that sort of showed their experience. And this was an example of a picture that he'd taken. It was somewhere in Europe, I can't remember exactly where it was. But it was a statue that had been created to represent grief, and it actually represented grief, that sort of hollowed out, awful feeling that comes with grief. And as you see from that first quote there, he basically said that this was the most powerful physical representation he'd ever seen of what it felt like. So there are also, amongst obviously how it's impacting work and living with the impact of that abuse, for men that are fathers, there's that whole aspect of it as well. Next slide, please. So I won't talk too much about barriers to help seeking, because I know that that's being covered in a different presentation. But just to say that men experience gender stereotype treatment when they're trying to get access to help and support. And this can lead to potential for what we call secondary victimisation, which basically means when they're trying to get, as a vulnerable victim group, trying to get help and support, they are then also being basically re-victimised by the services that they're trying to get access to. So it is lumping more victimisation onto what they're experiencing. And men fear not being believed, they fear being accused of being the perpetrator, they fear being laughed at or ridiculed, and it has a really significant impact in terms of them being able to ask for help. Next slide, please. This was also something I thought was really important to include as I come to the end now, is the importance of support. So for some men, they were talking about work being a really important part of how they were kind of trying to keep sane through this process, where work was sort of a sanctuary. Sounds a bit of a dramatic word to use, but it felt like that. It was away from the abuse. It was somewhere where they had a different sort of identity, a different part of them was there. They were able to kind of engage in other things and almost distract themselves from it. But it was also the case that the support that some of the men received from work was a really important aspect of not only them asking for help and support more broadly, but also in terms of their sort of, recovery or coping with that abuse after the end of the relationship, as they were sometimes still living with quite long-term effects of that. And the importance of asking the question is just points to the fact that I think we need to, if there is ever a case where you suspect that something is happening, then I would encourage you to ask the question in a very safe, cautious, supportive, all those sorts of scenarios. But sometimes it's not enough for men to just have that space to disclose. That isn't always enough. Sometimes it is about asking that question. And that quote is from the study with the photos that I mentioned, where he talked about how he had been attacked, they had to ring an ambulance, all the way there, she was with him the whole way to the hospital, and she was saying about how clumsy he was and it had been an accident, blah, blah, blah. And then they got to the hospital and she was still there with him the whole time, and he was still talking about how, how silly he was, how clumsy he was. And then the doctor at the time thought there was something not right, so he took him away to a different room on the pretense of going for an x-ray or something, and basically said, look, do you need help? And because somebody had asked him directly, they'd shown that concern, they'd shown that potential for support, they'd already validated by showing that they believed them. He said, yes, he disclosed for the first time in 11 years what he'd been experiencing. So I think that the importance of kind of these support structures is huge. Next slide, please. So thank you so much for listening. I'm happy to take any questions. I'm really sorry, but I can't stay for the Q&A at the end of the webinar. So please do take a note of my email address. I'll pop it in the chat as well in case anybody wants it. And I'm really happy to connect on X, on LinkedIn, or over email. If anybody's got any questions at all for me later, please don't hesitate to get in touch. I'm also really happy to share any of the research if anybody would like to read a bit more about some of the stuff I've been talking about. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Liz, and a really strong message to end on. Just ask the question. And from the people that we speak to, work is their sanctuary. So I think that's a really strong message there. Thank you so much. I know you just said that you can't stay for the Q&A, but I think you might be able to stick around for a little while. So if people do have questions, we can share them with Liz after, and she might be around to pop things in the chat. So thank you so much. I'm going to now hand over to Mark and Gareth. If you could pop your cameras on.
Thank you. Mine's been disabled, so.
Oh, someone from the IDA team could get his camera back on. That'd be great. Thank you.
Okay. Right, start my video. That sounds good. Thank you very much, and thank you very much, Aisha, and welcome everybody. So my name's Mark Brooks. I'm the chair of the Domestic Abuse Charity for Men Mankind Initiative. And what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to have a conversation with Gareth, and to talk through Gareth's experiences in terms of the domestic abuse that he went through, but also importantly, the impact on his work, and also what support his employer gave to him. And as Gareth explains, he currently works for the NHS. And so obviously it's a big organisation. It's really going to be quite instructive and reflective about what support and the impact on his work and also his work colleagues as well. So Gareth, without any further ado, I mean, we'll just go through some background, if I may. So, how did you meet your ex, and, broadly what happened?
Yeah, so I mean, we met online on an online dating app back around July 2021. This would have been so the way that the world has kind of moved on at the moment, it has become this online dating phenomenon. Kind of long past the kind of the days where you would go out and meet anybody in a pub or club. So I'd been out of the dating game for a little bit, kind of figured I wanted to kind of get back into dating again. So went online, and then first off just met, getting to chat normally how you would, likes, dislikes, found out we had a few things in common, and just kind of how you would start up any kind of conversation with somebody, really just getting them to know them initially, and going on a couple of dates. So to begin with, very normal.
Okay, and then moving on from there, what then happened when you were, if you like, living together, and how did you get to live together, and what happened when you were in the same house?
So yeah, so I mean, it was kind of obviously a bit fast. It was very fast moving to begin with. So I mean, we'd been on a couple of dates and as I look back on it now, I've come to learn that they call it, love bombing. She was very kind of overly loving towards me. And kind of at the time, when you think, oh, wow, how can this person kind of be that way, that you kind of do think, oh, I want things to work out here, and then it can work out for the long run. And I think it was kind of then when she'd convinced me to leave the property that I was renting on at the present. So that would have been around about late October time. So, only 3-4 months into a relationship to move in with her. And then that's then kind of when the abuse started. So it was very subtle to begin with, but it kind of accelerated quite rapidly, which is what the kind of police were kind of shocked at afterwards. It was it was all kind of things. It was emotional, physical, financial. There was isolation. So I was getting isolated from friends, family. I wasn't allowed to keep any belongings in the house. What I could keep was minimal. I wasn't allowed a key for the property. I wasn't allowed to shower, or if I did, I had to thoroughly disinfect the bathroom down afterwards. As she said, males weren't the cleanliest. I wasn't allowed to eat as well. I ended up losing 4.5 stone in 2 months because I was refrained from eating anything. I also had physical abuse. If I couldn't perform in the bedroom, I was made to sleep on the floor with no covers on, with the windows open as a punishment. I actually also wasn't allowed to use the bathroom in the house as well, so I couldn't defecate. I'd have to try and hold it in and make it down to a local supermarket or pub. And she would also keep her dating app active the kind of whole time we were in the relationship. So there was a lot of ridiculing. There was a lot of being told, you know, oh, look, I could get this person round, I could get that person round. I was coerced into giving all my money. She wanted control of my phone, my finances, my social media, what I could and could not post online. So yeah, it was quite, you know, subtle, but I said rapid in terms of how it all escalated. And it was that psychological side, I think, and the being constantly ridiculed and demeaned. And then you kind of do believe, you know, being told you're worthless and that you kind of do believe then that is the truth. And, you know, I was told you were just the walking ATM. That's what you're in this relationship for. And when people kind of said to me, you know, when people would say, look, why didn't you just leave? Well, she would say to me, if you try and do anything, then I'll go to the police and I'll tell them that you assaulted me or you did even worse things. And who do you think the police are going to believe? So then you do kind of feel trapped then, you know, is because there is that stigmatism there. And I did kind of feel, well, yeah, I'm not going to be heard if, you know, or if I do try and do anything, she will just go to the police and, you know, I'll end up being arrested and whatnot. So you do kind of then feel that you are in this bubble and difficult to escape, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and certainly that chimes with so much of what Liz was talking about. And we'll go on to how you left and you know how you're doing now at the end. But just thinking about the kind of two periods at work in terms of like when you were with her. So it's kind of three periods. I mean, how were things at work before you met her? What impact did it have on your work when you were with her, and how much support have you had from your employer after you left? So, you know, how things were work before you met her, and what happened while you were in work with
So
her?
yeah, so things were fine before I met her, you know, steady, you know, everything as normal as you'd normally expect a normal working routine to be. During the relationship with her, I did, as Liz kind of said, I used work as an escapism. I used it as an opportunity to think, well, at least, you know, I've got my work there, and if I can try and keep things professional and, you know, keep kind of that face on things within work, not to let on anything that was happening behind the scenes, that, you know, it would look at it professionally. I mean, this was during a period, obviously, when we were still just coming out of COVID. So it was difficult. I mean, as Liz had said earlier, if she was having a bad day, I had my laptop hidden. Because I wasn't allowed to be in the house or the property, and when she only when she was there, was being forced to go down to the library and work, which was very disruptive. You know, I had to, and even then she would ring me, text me 30, 40, 50 times to make sure that I was at where I was supposed to be at, and that, you know, if I was told to come back home, if I wasn't home in a certain point, I would get beaten for it. So I would have to, you know, if she would steal my laptop from me just to kind of, if she was having a bad day, you know, she would say, right, I'm being inconvenienced, so I'm going to inconvenience you. So I'd have to walk the streets sometimes. So it was very disruptive. I'd have to try and use tactics like keeping my camera off, trying to just make up some excuses that I was having IT issues, that I couldn't get my camera to work. Also as well, you know, what I would do is do all my emails late at night. So, and then I would save them all as drafts, and then I would resend them first thing the following morning, so it didn't look as if I was up till 2, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning, because that was the only time I was able to get a lot of my work done. So obviously I was getting sleep deprived. There was all the weight loss from not being able to eat. So I think, you know, sometimes people did, you know, start noticing that as well. They did kind of notice a change in my appearance on calls, and, you know, once or twice people asked me if things were all right, and I just kind of, you know, tried to brush it off as if, oh no, you know, everything's okay. And I think because of that stigmatism there, that if I did try to tell anybody in work what kind of, you know, fear of reprimand I might get from it, I also had to try to use a bit of reverse psychology and say to her, well, look, you know, if I can't work, then I can't make any money, and that way if I can't make any money, you can't have it all. So that was kind of a way that I had to try to use that to get around things, to say, well, look, you know, if you're stopping me from working, then I can't make any money to give to you. So, you know, I didn't really want to have to do that at all, but it was kind of the only way that I could, I suppose, keep some sanity and some escapism to be able to kind of use work for that period, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and you know, the relation, I mean, you were able to escape from the relationship. I mean, do you want to just dwell on that a bit, and then we'll talk about the support that you got from work colleagues. But did it actually impact on your work performance, as well as, obviously there was those issues? I mean, did your performance at work drop off? And
Oh, I think it definitely
yeah,
deteriorated because
yeah,
of, you know, the constant, you know, disruptions. Like if she wanted to pop out to the tanning salon in the afternoon because that suited her at that moment in time, and I might have an important meeting and I'd have to leave that meeting, and, you know, so it was very disruptive. And I said, having to stay up late at night, I mean, seeing how I left, I knew she was away in an appointment, and that she would be there for us, you know, for a good hour, hour and a half. So I'd kind of arranged to meet my mum for a coffee in secret, because I had to basically make up a code word with my mum, when I knew she would be quickly out of the room, that I could, you know, speak freely for a couple of minutes. So I'd arranged to meet her, and a message had popped up on my phone, saying, you know, had I taken a packet of crisps from the house? And I said, well, look, you know, I'm at the library working. I just want to have, you know, a snack to eat. Although I was barely even allowed a salad, you know. And my mum saw that, and I said, you know, yeah, I had done that. And she basically messaged me back with a load of expletives and said, you're definitely not eating again, you know, for the next week. And my mum saw that message pop up on my phone and just broke down into tears and said, look, these are all the signs of domestic abuse, and if you're not going to listen to me, please just speak to somebody independently. So I thought, you know, yeah, she's right, I can't put my family through this. And the next day I made a phone call to your charity, to Mankind, and they said, you know, yeah, these are all the signs of domestic abuse and you need to get out. So the following day I basically left. They said, you know, make sure you've got as minimal belongings as you can, but make sure you've got the important things that you're going to need, you know, like my work laptop, my phone, wallet, you know. So I basically left with just the clothes on my back and those just basic 2 or 3 things with me, and fled. And then obviously reported it to the police. From there, she did ring my workplace. She contacted me. She contacted my workplace and tried to place it all onto me, and tried to say that she was the victim and I was an abuser, which fractured a lot of relationships for me in work. There had to be, you know, investigations and things, and because because it was going through the court system at that time, and saying how the employer, you know, was there with me, they said, look, you know, first and foremost, Gareth, you were our employee. And, you know, unfortunately, yeah, we have to go through process and procedure, but I'm sure, you know, that you know, everything will sort itself out, and, you know, any support that we can provide to you, because I had given them kind of a brief outline of actually, you know, at that point, what was happening to me, that they were extremely supportive. They signposted me, you know, when it was going through the judicial system, like anything I needed, if I needed to take time away, if I needed to, you know, make sure that I had kind of regular relaxation breaks and things in work, that I could take some time away, but I wanted to kind of, as I said, keep using work as a kind of escapism. So yeah, I mean, that was the kind of immediate thing, but I still hadn't disclosed it to any work colleagues or anybody, just because of fear of that stigmatism out there of, you know, am I just going to get ridiculed by people for, you know, what would they think of me if, you know, now.
And you know, when it all came out, because you know there was a court case and your ex was successfully prosecuted. I mean, when it all came out, how did they respond then, and how have they responded, you know, since?
Oh, they've been overwhelmingly supportive from it, you know, and kind of recognizing that, you know, like it can and does happen to men. You know, they've treated me as an equal throughout this whole process. I mean, obviously, because it was quite a high profile case when it all kind of broke in the media and everything. And I remember the following morning, you know, I had a message off a work colleague asking me if I was okay. And I said, yeah, you know, I'm fine. And they said, you know, well, have you not seen the newspapers this morning? I said, no. And then the next thing I know, it was kind of popping up everywhere. And they just said, look, we can't believe that you went through all of that and still managed to maintain professionalism and being courteous and kind to work colleagues. And well, so all that was going on behind the scenes. And I said, well, you know, I just look at it that I was just trying to do my job and have the opportunity to use it as an escapism from what was, you know, what was going on personally behind the scenes at that point. But yeah, they've been very extremely supportive and signposted me and helped me along the way. And as I said, you know, put reasonable adjustments in if I needed it. So yeah, I would say that they really kind of, when it all broke and everything, did go the kind of the extra mile to try and help and recognize and be supportive.
Brilliant. And that's so positive to hear. And I suppose, you know, building on that, you know, what are the top three things employers should think about when it comes to their male staff who are going through domestic abuse? You know, what would you tell the audience here today, what they should do if there was a similar situation than yours, broadly? I mean,
Very good question. I would say that kind of, and I think more so with, you know, for what I experienced more was the psychological and emotional abuse had you know, don't get me wrong, the physical stuff was not good, but that had more of a longer lasting impact on me, you know, and that it took me a lot of time to go through therapy and things, and to, you know, I knew that it wouldn't be resolved overnight. So I would just say that, you know, that to recognize that it's probably more so that psychological impact, and it's kind of probably maybe a different kind of support that you kind of need to get through that. You know, I had to go for a lot of psychotherapy and things to kind of, you know, your brain becomes conditioned so much into wanting this is what you know, and wanting to provide for that person, that it's, you know, that to go through that recovery phase is you know, it's not an overnight thing, it's a long winding road, and there's obviously ups and downs there. So it's just, I suppose, recognizing that. I would say, you know, that it does, because it does happen to both men and women, you know, these type of things should never happen to anyone, really, you know. But just, I suppose, like Liz said earlier, being able to have that conversation with people to say, are you okay if you do, you know, witness something that you think is not quite right here, that, you know, being a supportive and approachable to them. I think that was a big difference. And I think probably finally as well, that, as I probably said throughout all of this, is that I used it as an escape for me. So and it's recognizing that sometimes people, it's not shying away and thinking, all right, well, just because they're going through this, we're going to stop giving them work or anything like that. It's more about putting those reasonable adjustments in place to make sure that they're still supported. Because for me, I just wanted to be able to work,
Yeah.
and I suppose it's just recognizing that side as well, I would say.
Brilliant, thank you. And that's really sound advice. Just very quickly, just like 30 seconds, if you like. How are you doing now? How's life at the moment?
Oh, I'm a lot better. As I said, I can talk about things a bit more easily because I've been through the recovery and things. As I said, it's not a short road, but you can come through it. Since then, my job, I was only an interim at that point. My job's been made permanent since I've had a promotion. My life's back on track again. So it shows that you can come out the other side of this.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Well, that's a fantastic end to this session, and I know there's been lots in the chat. So thank you so much, Gareth, for really bringing some of that research Liz showed and bringing that to life. And thank you for all that you're doing, speaking up for men who are going through this. So thank you very much, Gareth. Lots of praise in the chat, and we'll catch up soon, my friend, for a pint.
Yeah.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. Gareth, it's so incredible to work alongside you. And, I'm sure it never gets easier talking about your own experiences, but it will be having a huge impact for people on the call, victims and survivors on the call, and people that have people in their lives that they're concerned about. So you provided some really practical ways that that others can get that support. And I really would encourage you to have a look at the messages in the chat. There's a lot of love out in there for you. I'm now going to hand over to Sian and Chris to talk us through the last 10 minutes. Thank you both.
Thank you, Aisha. Hi, everybody. As I said before, I'm Sian from the Paul Lavelle Foundation. The Paul Lavelle Foundation was established in 2018, and that was sadly off the back of the death of our friend from a domestic abuse incident, which was 2017 in May. Paul Lavelle was a local lad in the Wirral, which is in Merseyside, and he had a great network of friends, myself included. A lot of friends had grown up with him, and he was just a great lad. And similar to Gareth, he met somebody online, and none of us recognised the red flags and the signs that Paul was in an abusive relationship, because Paul didn't tell anyone what was going on whatsoever. No family, no friends. And slowly but surely he became isolated. He was a big Everton fan, went to all the home and away games and even abroad, but he stopped doing that. He stopped turning up for the Everton bus with the lads. He stopped coming to functions or social gatherings that we had. But none of us thought to question. None of us thought, well, why has? We thought we've met someone new. He must be all loved up with this new person. But how wrong we were. And in relation to sort of the workplace, Paul was an alarm fitter for a local alarm company, and he had a good relationship with his boss. And sadly, at the court case, his boss was one of the main people that gave evidence, because, as I say, Paul hadn't told anyone, and it was his boss and his neighbours that had witnessed the previous abuse and the coercion, the controlling behaviours. Paul had had previous injuries in work. But again, we weren't educated enough to recognise the signs and speak out and ask Paul and, try and help him in that way. And we'll never know now why Paul didn't come forward. Was it the shame, the stigma? Was it because he didn't recognise it was an abusive relationship he's in? Because we don't talk about male domestic abuse. We don't talk about domestic abuse, full stop. But in particular, the experiences with males. So off the back of what happened to Paul, we thought, this can't happen. We need to raise awareness. So we started the charity. And then when you register a charity, you have to have charity aims of what you wish to achieve. So on screen now is the aims that we continue to try and champion and achieve within the charity itself. So raising awareness, and that's local and national. We've done a lot of work with Mark from Mankind. He's been very supportive of us in our early years. Then we also wanted to provide some kind of like therapeutic, like Gareth was saying, some kind of therapy or to help with the recovery, because as Gareth was talking then, it's such a severe impact on the mental well-being and the conditioning of how, you know, the abuse and the effects. So we wanted to offer some kind of support, that there was nothing for Paul if he had reached out in our local region. And, you know, there isn't sort of within the UK, I think there's only about 5 dedicated male domestic abuse support agencies. So we offer early intervention therapeutic support, which is on a one-to-one basis, and it's also in peer groups as well. And like I said before, because we didn't recognise the signs in Paul's relationship and what was happening to Paul, we wanted to essentially try and break the cycle of domestic abuse by educating young people at, you know, early stage to understand what a healthy relationship looks like and what those red flags of abusive traits look like as well. So we go into local schools and colleges. To date, we've for the last 7 years we've been operating, we've reached over 10,000 young people in our area, educating on, you know, that side of things. And also fundraising and promotion of mental health and well-being, which is a big factor of recovery from domestic abuse. Next slide, please. Sorry. Also, as part of the foundation, we do a lot of awareness sessions with professionals and frontline responders, which is great. We've worked with Merseyside Police. We work with social work service, social care services. And what we mainly talk about, which is so important, I think, within domestic abuse, is the conscious and unconscious bias that can exist, because narrative is pushed more so that it's an issue that affects women and girls. But, you know, as Liz and Mark and Gareth has said previous, it really does. It's so prevalent in males and people don't speak about it enough, and it causes unconscious bias, which conscious bias we probably can't do much about because people have their own prejudice or their own views on certain aspects. But unconscious bias, we can educate and raise awareness, and that's what we aim to do as a charity, to raise that awareness so that unconscious bias becomes less and less when you know, talking about domestic abuse. So in the workplace in particular, you know, unconscious bias, you can sort of, you know, make pre-assumptions or prejudgments on a scenario. And like's been said previous, we get a lot of males that come through that have had false allegations made against them and wrongful arrest, where, you know, it's so detrimental to them as a person, their mental health, but also we've had men who have actually lost the jobs because, again, that unconscious bias, that preconception that they are the perpetrator, when female perpetrators and abusers sadly know how to coerce the system as they do their actual partners, so they can, you know, turn the tables and try and make out that they're the victim, and that can cause serious mental health, poor mental health, to the point of suicide ideation, which we deal with a lot, don't we, Chris? So it's being aware of your conscious and unconscious bias in that respect. Next slide, please. At the Paul Lavelle Foundation, we support men, full stop. So we support heterosexual males, we support men from same-sex relationships, but we also support men who are abused by family members as well, because domestic abuse isn't just limited to intimate partner relationships. It does involve family members. It can be, we've had scenarios where grandsons have abused granddads. We've had sons and brothers who have abused, you know, family members. So it's right across the board as well. And it's, again, having that broader perspective of what domestic abuse looks like and who can be victim groups, which is basically anyone. So just a couple of barriers here for gay men that may face when reaching out, because there's another level of barriers for disclosure. So fear of not being believed, their experience may be minimised, stereotyping, lack of inclusive services, whilst you know, we support males in same sex, but sometimes there's different characteristics, and we can work with the likes of the LGBTQ Foundation, which are based in Manchester and Liverpool, and there's different types of support, but there's not many across the UK at all. Fear of being outed, like Liz said before, limited understanding among professionals about the dynamics of abuse in same-sex relationships, and that goes to say about the myth of domestic abuse is about power and control. So if they think it's two males, then they think that balance of power and control can't be skewed one way. Fear of the police or legal system and the discrimination. And males from the LGBTQ community might have spaces that are shared that they access regular, and it could be again like an isolation thing that they don't want to come forward. Next slide, please. Sorry, okay. This is just an overview of the support that we offer from our foundation. We are, by geographical remit, Merseyside and Cheshire, which is based through the Charity Commission. However, we don't sort of close the door on anyone that we have supported right around the UK if people phone us. So we take clients on a journey of recovery. You can see on the left there what the session involves. And then once they've been through our emotional and practical support with the therapeutic side, we then lead them on to sort of peer support where they can help, sort of shared experiences and men supporting men. Next slide, please. Just a bit of feedback from some of our survivors that we obviously use the lived experience of our survivors to shape our service, to help us with, as sounding boards, to make sure we're getting it right, as well as when we go in to present to our awareness sessions, to make sure the lived experience it's so powerful. As you've heard from Gareth there, it's such a powerful, impactful thing to hear from real lived experiences. But these are some of the key parts that came out. So to educate and change the thought process of frontline staff, and that's including police, family courts, health, social care. Consider that the man, regardless of his physical stature or status, may actually be the victim. Offer them the same advice and support you would as a female. Many think because of the disparity in strength and size with a female in relation to a male that, it's not possible. But as you've heard previously, absolutely it is. It's the power and control element of domestic abuse, and it doesn't matter about the size or stature of a man. To provide dedicated services, there's a severe lack of them across the UK. Remove gendered language and imagery altogether. So, imagery depicts usually for domestic abuse is a woman cowering from a man, which again can create that unconscious bias. Combat negative public attitudes about male domestic abuse, and highlight that all victim survivors of domestic abuse deserve to receive equal support. Next slide, please. Do you want to?
No, fine.
So a few takeaways just to sort of finish the section. So acknowledge that men can be victims too. Avoid gendered assumptions. Ensure policies are inclusive of all genders. Create a safe, non-judgmental environment, so where male employees do feel comfortable being able to come forward without fear of stigma or disbelief. Train managers, HR teams to recognise domestic abuse and respond with sensitivity. Promote awareness through internal campaigns and resources. We provide a lot of our flyers for the back of toilet doors in many companies around, so it's like that private space, obviously. Promote awareness through internal campaigns and resources that reflect male survivors' experiences as well as female. Signpost to specialist support services. Ensure domestic abuse policies are visible. Don't try and be the counsellor or therapist yourselves. There's specialist support out there. And encourage culture of compassion where employees understand domestic abuse can affect anyone. The actual domestic abuse definition, the legal definition in the Domestic Abuse Act is non-gendered, and it stipulates that anybody can be a victim regardless of gender, sexuality, age. And then last but not least, be conscious of your unconscious bias. Thank you. We've designed an app. Oh, sorry, I'm well over time.
It's okay. It's okay. Finish up, Sean. Thank you.
I was going to say we've designed an app on the previous slide if anyone wants to download, and that gives general information around domestic abuse and various other topics and issues, but it's like a bit of an education tool that can be used in the workplace as well. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, both of you. That's really, really interesting and helpful information. And we have had a few questions come in, and some of them have been answered live. But just to follow on from some of the points you touched on there, just to put a question to both of you that we've had in the Q&A here. So someone has asked, we know that some perpetrators can falsely make counter allegations against the partner they are actually abusing. And the person has two questions on this. How can we support services and the police to know when, for example, a woman is making a false counter allegation against their male partner so that men who are actually being abused are believed?
I personally think there's a macro level need to understand taking the politics out of domestic abuse, because we very often experience where local teams are very supportive to male victims. But once you get to the kind of higher echelons of lots of organizations and institutions, there's almost a kind of prejudice that does kick in, understandably, around kind of the way that politics tend to be making more barriers for males to have to prove their vulnerability and their being a victim. So I do sadly think that a lot of the time it's not necessarily the local stuff that needs to change. It's how the top end political way that the whole of domestic abuse is kind of treated that needs to change, really, because without those major changes from the top, it's very hard for institutions that have these political imperatives to kind of act more around objectivity rather than the subjectivity that comes from having to do things according to a particular political dogma, if that makes sense. Probably a bit clumsy there. I think you got the gist.
It's so hard, and I think, you know, bi-directional domestic abuse is quite prevalent as well, where it's both ways, and it, you know, our job is so hard sometimes to unpick what is really going on. So I think as an employer, you can just be there to support and understand. I don't think, you know, you have to step that level to get involved to try and be, as I said before, the judge and jury and try and prove any facts are right or wrong. That's not your sort of role in it. I think being supportive, and then, would you say, Chris?
I think again, things should be on a case-by-case basis, and if they were, I mean, irrespective of whether or not it's child abuse, institutional abuse, animal abuse, the patternistic way that abusive relationships develop are the same. So if we look at things from a case-by-case, rather than being too homed in around particular differences, I think we'd be a lot more objective in how we treat the information, the assessment, and the investigation in a fairer way.
Brilliant, thank you. Thank you for those answers. I'm going to draw the session to a close just with some final comments, but thank you to all of our speakers. We appreciate your time today and sharing your experiences and expertise. There's a couple of questions that were answered live, and we can send them to the speakers in case they have any additional thoughts on those as well, and we can put those in with the written summary in case you put a question you were hoping to get an answer on that, so don't worry. We would appreciate if you could take a couple of minutes just to complete the feedback form that we're going to be posting in the chat bar now, and I think there might be a QR code popping up as well in a moment. Any feedback, we really do look at it, so please do be as honest as you like, and we'll use it to inform our future sessions, so take a couple of minutes to do that. We will be sharing a summary, as I mentioned, of today's session with the key resources, so information about the Paul Lavelle Foundation and about Mankind, and links to to Liz's research as well. So please have a look out for that one with the recording. We have the next Insight Hour on the 23rd of September, and we'll be looking at understanding and supporting Black employees affected by domestic abuse, which is going to be part of our wider ongoing campaign. So again, the link is in the chat there. Please do sign up and we will share further details closer to the time. Any topics you would like covered in future sessions, please always let us know. We'd be grateful for any input and feedback, as I said before. Thank you for coming today, and really hope we will see you soon and on the next session. Thanks all so much.